what happened is that the UAW created a second class of members, right? Is that kind of what this is, how this?
Well, I wouldn't say that the UAW created it. It would be Ford and ACH working together that would have created it. What our beef is essentially is that the UAW allowed this all to happen. That they pretty much allowed Ford, Visteon, Automotive Component Holdings, Faurecia Energy to do as they saw fit. Ford was more or less behaving as a company union at these points in time. So there were Ford 1 workers and there were Ford 2 workers, and then outside of even that, there were ACH workers. And the members of our suit were ACH workers. Now their goal was to become Ford 2, if not Ford 1. And in some cases, they've been waiting years to reach that point.
What was the legal connection between Ford and ACH? Would you consider it a subsidiary, or is it a?
I believe that it was. ACH was a successor corporation to Visteon. Now Visteon was basically as to Ford as Delphi was to General Motors, an entirely, in-house sort of parts manufacturer.
Yeah. And so why did in your view, why did the UAW allow this to happen?
Well, I couldn't really speculate as to what the UAW was thinking. We have some of the ACH workers believe that what Ford was up to was to get a cheaper subset of workers so that they could spin off these plants to companies like Faurecia Energy and so forth, and that the UAW was acquiescent and compliant in helping Ford to suppress these wages by, not providing the same level of benefits, not providing the same level of pay. These workers were not paid anywhere near what Ford workers would normally have been paid in this sort of situation. We're talking about $10, $11 per hour, as opposed to say $16 or higher than that for a typical auto worker.
And the contracts were breached 2003. I worked under that contract 2007. All those contracts were breached. There was agreements in those contracts to not allow the transferred Ford people to be coming into an ACH plant and getting jobs there, but they did that when they got rid of the gen pool. We became the gen pool. And it ousted us.
Yeah, so basically when you guys were hired in at ACH, there was a claim made by the union and by ACH as well that you would become, full-time. At some point, you could move up the Ford ladder and become.
I was self-employed and I had a daycare business out of my home, and in order for me to make a decision to do this as my career versus the daycare, at the first orientation, we were all standing there, and I wasn't the only one. There was quite a few in there that heard. We would be 89 days, and then we would be laid off. So, and I didn't stop my daycare. During the orientation, I made my decision to go with that company because they said, oh no, you're not 89 days, you are the next generation Ford. The people, the tier 1 Ford people had taken buyouts, quite a few of them, probably more than they thought. So they were shorthanded in the parts plants. They were told they either had to go transfer or take the buyout because they were selling or closing the plants. So we were there. In all this transition, we were there. I was there 6.5 years at Saline, trained the people that took the jobs. I'm, good employee, and the union always, in the first orientation, saying we were going to be the next generation Ford. Every contract that came up, we voted on Ford contract. They always told us we didn't have an ACH contract. So how are you basing our disciplinary actions when someone needs disciplinary actions? We're basing it on the Ford contract. Okay, we're working under the Ford contract. Our Ford Global ID number from day one is the same one I use at Flat Rock today. And it does not acknowledge, if you call in the absenteeism line, it does not acknowledge any seniority date but my initial 2007 seniority date. That's how one of my friends got fired, because it didn't recognize her seniority date, because we weren't told in our orientation at Flat Rock to use our original. And so it called like a no call, no show, and she got let go. Because there's 3 different seniority dates I have. 2007, 2013 and 2014.
And were
Or
originally
2012 and 2013.
Yeah, when you originally hired in at ACH, you were told then that date would be, you would be considered a Ford employee at that.
Well, Visteon Ford, all my paperwork that I signed, when I did my applications and everything I signed, everything says Ford Motor Company. Everything, I got copies of all my information because they were shredder trucks outside when Felicia took over. And I was worried that my information would be messed with or shredded up. So I went down there and asked for copies of my employment papers. First, they denied me. I said I will seek a lawyer because that is my information and I don't know what you're going to do with it. And all the mix-up that was going on and the misconceptions and all that, the lies, I wanted verification that I had a good work record. And that night, he left a message on my phone to pick up my records because he knew that I had the right to them. Everything on there said my Ford service date, not Visteon service date, not ACH service date. And ACH didn't come along until about 3 years later. 3 years later is when I was considered ACH temporary. Temporary was never used until I became ACH. And everything, my medical, everything is Ford Motor Company on it. Nothing says anything
Yeah,
else.
but because you're temporary, then your seniority doesn't apply later on, right? That's what.
But what happened to the 3 years before I turned ACH?
Yeah.
And then when we did that, it's always, and then when we were supposed to vote on things or ratify things, it was always, if you don't do this, you're not going to have a job. It was always a threat of our job, always. Voting, it was always by coercion. Well, if you don't vote for this, then you won't have this, you know. We didn't have a contract. We accumulated a year's vacation pay, a year paid personal. After 3 years, I had some kind of medical and dental. They said it was just catastrophic. But after 3.5 years, they froze my wages. I worked under a contract that told me I was getting raises every so often. And after we ratified to agree with the Ford agreement that they lost the day after Easter, their breaks got shortened, we had to vote that in because we were, the Ford people, they couldn't enforce it with us there, and we got 20-minute breaks and they wouldn't. So we had to do that. They threw out prescriptions, well, now you get prescriptions and stuff. They didn't tell us. Right after we ratified, that is when our pay or break got froze. They didn't get anything. Then when we get over to Flat Rock, they give us a year made-up seniority. We get over there and we got a 16-cent raise, but we're froze for 1 more year. So the people coming off the street, the referrals, and the people coming off the street that are getting jobs behind us, they're making almost the same amount as I am, and I've worked 6.5 years making Ford parts, working next to Ford employees. And in the union, I went to union meetings and we've asked questions. We requested contracts, denied to be able to run for offices. They filed a petition with International to stop us from filing or from running for any kind of union position.
Yeah. So is that the legal thing that they were trying to pull, that they were considering these people temporary employees when in fact they were just regular employees? I mean, they sounded like they were doing all the stuff that everybody else was doing.
In some cases temporary, but in other cases just, strictly the differences between ACH workers and regular Ford workers. When ACH workers filed grievances, those grievances seemed to be basically put inside someone's desk and never dealt with again.
You were blue, light blue, dark blue, or orange. They treated you differently at every aspect. When you went down to the union office, they asked you, were you dark blue, light blue, or orange? I was considered orange because I was ACH at that time. That's a form of discrimination. We were treated differently, as we are at Flat Rock also. We're getting the bad jobs and the referrals, which are, nepotism and favoritism is terrible. At one time, that's what the union fought against, and now it's what they stand for. They bring their family in there, and they're all over there in the easy jobs, and we're on the lines, working on the cars, and they're standing there on their phone. Their discipline is different. My 90 days was different than theirs. We were let go, and it was verbally said in locker rooms about the Saline people. We were targeted at Flat Rock.
Yeah. So basically, what you guys are saying is that the UAW allowed a 2-tiered or more than that, maybe 2 tiers or maybe more tiers of
Treatment.
Of
Yes,
treatment.
yes.
Mhm.
They failed to represent certain workers, they treated certain
They
workers
still
like
do.
they were
They still
intended
do. They
to
still do.
be there for only a few years before they would be pushed out the door one way or another.
I cannot exercise my seniority. There was a person that didn't have 90 days in, and I asked to have that job to get a break off my job, and they would not do it because he is related to someone. And he has AWOLs in his first 90 days, and he did not get let go. Versus my friend trying to call in, use the wrong seniority date, gets discharged, and it's been almost a year she's fighting to get back in there.
So the outcome of the lawsuit is what that you guys want to have happen. What is it that you're after exactly now?
Well, these workers should be restored to what their seniority actually should be. Their seniority should begin from the date at which they were issued a Ford Global ID, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
How are they not Ford workers? They were as much Ford workers as anyone else at that time. And they have paid union dues also. So the union would either, should be obligated to return these dues when they weren't representing people, or to fight for these people to get their fair share at this point. You know, their fair share of seniority, their wages, their benefits, all this stuff should be backdated to the time at which they actually started. Because neither Ford nor ACH nor these other corporations nor the UAW has shown any particular inclination to do any of those things to this point or to rectify this situation. This isn't a union busting activity, and these workers are still UAW members. That's the last thing anybody wants. But it just at the point at which legal action was the only avenue left available to these ACH employees and former ACH employees.
And Candy, I think,
So the
UAW
sins of this whole ACH thing continue today as these folks have moved on to other Ford facilities or
Absolutely, they're
because they
still
lost
not-
seniority and all
Yeah, I
of that.
shouldn't have had to do my 90 days. I did 90 days 6.5 years ago.
Gotcha.
And the union told us, they told us all these stipulations, we would not have to we wouldn't have to do a drug test, we'd just have to do a physical, we wouldn't have to do our 90 days. I mean, nothing was gonna change, we weren't gonna lose our insurance. Everything was a lie, it was all a lie.
Candy, talk about this last bonus that came out,
Okay.
what they did to
The
you.
profit sharing.
Okay, could you actually slide that mic over here?
Sure.
And then
That's
kind
very
of
vital.
talk that toward the camera there, so let me get out of the way here. So I'll just come over this.
Yeah, Henry, you come over.
So go ahead.
Okay. And profit sharing, Ford Motor Company, ACH employees were told that the UAW got them a 20% of what a Ford worker would make. That's what we would get. And so we got a profit sharing, 20% of whatever the Ford got the last year, and the year before last. And this last year, with all this transition, we were told nothing was going to change. No insurance change, nothing while we stayed there until we got placed to Ford. And I have an agreement signed by the president, Mark Caruso, that states that they would prorate our profit sharing. So the amount of time that we were at the ACH plant, we would get that prorated at 20%, and then whatever we worked at Ford Motor Company when we started there, it would be prorated, and we get 100% of whatever hours we worked there. Sheldon Road got their profit sharing checks. We worked next to them. They said they got their profit sharing checks from working until they got placed at Ford. So we never got a check, so I was asking about that. And they're claiming that we signed up with DAS, which was only supposed to be a payroll agreement for someone to pay us, because Farisha didn't want to pay us. And DAS was a cleaning service, and they're already established with Ford. So they were just going to pay us. This is what the UAW told us in the information meeting. So we're under the assumption we're going to get that prorated 20% profit sharing, and then the prorated Ford. We never got it, and I just talked to the head of Human Resources this morning, and we are not getting the 20% because the union misled us to believe that it was just signing for a paycheck for DAS, when in fact she said we signed as employees with DAS. Yeah. So now we don't get the measly 20%, which wasn't much as half a year. You know, you're talking a multi-billion-dollar company that won't give us 20%, and we stayed there and helped this company, because if every one of us would have left Saline plant, there was enough of us, we would have shut down Ford plants. Dearborn, Wayne, Flat, we would have shut them down. We provided parts with all major assembly plants. We stayed there because we were told we wouldn't get unemployment or anything else. Some people can't afford to live on nothing, so we stayed there. Nowhere on the piece of papers that we signed did it say we would not get profit sharing and that we were a DAS employee.
And they did that also in 2011 and 2012 to the ACH workers that were in Milan. We were ACH workers for half a year, and they handed out bonuses for the ACH workers, and we were not entitled to not one dime of that bonus, even though we were ACH workers for those six months. And the union told us that we were not going to be entitled to it because there was no bonus going out for ACH. You know, they kept denying that we were ever going to get anything. Yet the decision for that was made about 2 months after we were forced to sign with Energy.
A final statement that we think we should make here, that these workers that were working in these areas, go ahead. I'm
If I move the microphone, please.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
These workers that got into this lawsuit.
Okay, hold on a minute. Hold on a second. We got- It's kind of a, play musical cameras, and so.
These people were afraid of their jobs, and one of the hardest decisions to make was to file a lawsuit. And they all said, "Do we file against Ford?" And I said, why do you want to file against Ford? They said, "We really want to file against our international union because we lost our seniority. They wouldn't do bonuses." And then I guess the crowning glory is they were afraid to talk about it because they said nobody knew our story. And I said, well, what can we do about that? So I took 3 weeks back and I went to Washington, D.C. and made appointments with their representatives. I took it to Senator Carl Levin, and I took it to Debbie Stabeno's office. I actually spoke with Carl. And then we went to John Conyers, who represents some of these workers. And then I went to John Dingle's office, who had surgery that day, but his top seniority man, I guess they call him aides, legislative aides, or their chief of staff, said he's in surgery, Pat, explained the situation. He said, we think there needs to be something done, okay? So